Satish Gujaral was a member of the Delhi Shilpi Chakra. He was born at Jhelum in Pakistan. At a young age of 11, he seemed to have lost his hearing ability, and from age of 11 to 18, he spent his time doodling and drawing, as well as reading Hindi and Urdu literature. His father, seeing his predilection towards drawing, admitted him to Mayo School of Art, where he graduated with a diploma in painting. In 1943, he came away to Bombay and joined J.J. School of Art, where he met artists as Souza and many others, including his own Punjabi compatriot Prannath Mago. In 1946, he had to return back to Jhelum due to certain physical ailment. Post-partition, Gujaral and his family settled in Delhi. When many artists at this time were traveling to two cities as Paris, London, or New York, Gujaral decided to go to Mexico, where he became an apprentice to the two muralists, Alfred Rivera and David Siqueiros. And from 1952 to 1977, Gujaral held many exhibitions across India as well as internationally and established his reputation. He was one of those first modernist post-independence who indulged not just in one medium of painting, but he was also a sculptor, a ceramist, a designer, an architect, and it was he who defined drawing as an independent art form. Studying under the muralists, he developed a very expressionist technique, and his works from 1947 to 1960 were based on partition subject. And here he created monumental forms that were expressionist in character due to the distortions that he brought about, particularly the exaggeration in the body and the facial features, which established his expressionist aim, and he developed his visual vocabulary in his theme of partition in this way. These were very powerful paintings that could affect the sensibility of the viewer in a very sympathetic as well as in an empathetic manner. Gujaral, it is said, has been criticized by the critics as paying too much attention to motion and movement. But he said for him, motion and movement was alternative to sound. And he said that stillness and silence was for him sound. And that's very poignant in the way he defined it. Gujaral developed his visual language, he developed his visual vocabulary, he moved on from being an expressionist artist to creating forms that had a greater design affiliation. But his line remained the most important saliency of his style. Since he worked in various mediums, including collages, so his visual vocabulary varied, and he was influenced by India's folk tradition as well as its classical tradition. And Gujaral, in this way, established his style, established his visual language, his vocabulary, developing his form, his structure, and the composition according to the medium in which he worked. And whichever medium he touched, he excelled in that. So Satish Gujaral, in that respect, was one of those modernists, post-independence, who made a tremendous contribution to the development not only of visual arts, but also in the post-independent style of working in a typical modernist manner, very elegantly combining his Western art influences along with the Indian tradition. Another important artist who belonged to the Delhi Shilpi Chakra was the wife of Kamal Krishna, namely Devyani Krishna. Kamal Krishna himself was a brilliant printmaker, and he seems to have influenced a generation of printmakers after him. And Devyani is considered to be a pioneering woman printmaker who also made a dent in the influences of modernity within India. Her prints that she developed had a certain elegance, had a certain symbolism and lyricism They were mainly and predominantly dominated by line and the subtlety of color shades that she was able to bring to her prints. She had also studied tribal art, Bhutan masks, as well as the folk art and the toys. All of this made an impact in her work, and her visual language tended towards abstraction, though when she painted, her works were quasi-figurative in nature. But she remains a pioneering woman printmaker post-independence. Another very important artist is Dinkar Kaushik. Dinkar Kaushik obtained his graduation in humanity from Mumbai University and then came away to Shantiniketan where he pursued art. Here he was very much influenced by the Tagore's legacy as well as by Nandalal Bose and Ramkinkar Bej. He ultimately became the principal of the Kala Bhavan at Shantiniketan. He was just not a painter but also a writer, an author as well as an art critic, and he has authored many books. Dinkar Kaushik works are very spontaneous, original, and there is a heavy leaning towards linearity because most of his figures and forms are outlined in black. There is a certain sketchiness which is there in his work that perhaps is the result of the spontaneous way of working, using his colors in a sketchy manner with thick impasto brushstrokes applied to his canvases. And his works also bear a strong resonance to the works of Ramkinkar Bej. Dinkar Kaushik also made a very important contribution towards modernity, and he was also a member of the Delhi Shilpi Chakra. Another important artist who belonged to the Delhi Shilpi Chakra was Ram Kumar. Ram Kumar was a self-taught artist, and he had an opportunity to learn drawing and painting when he was given a scholarship to go to Paris. And here in Paris, he studied under two major artists, namely André Lotte and Fernand Léger. Léger was a Cubist artist. And later on, Ram Kumar, who was a figurative artist, had his works tinged with the saliency of the Paris school of the abstractionist as he came strongly under their influence. Ram Kumar originally started with a lot of figurative compositions that were, one of despair in mood, etc. But then later, under the influence of the Paris school, he shifted to painting landscapes. It was just not landscapes, but everything that was there in nature. So there were mountains, hills, architecture, birds, rivers, etc. And he also painted the whole series of the various cities, particularly Varanasi series is well known and famous. Here, Ram Kumar reduced the architectural forms to their basic essentials. And he played about with the contrast of light and shade, had strong outlines which defined the character, but he moved away from the illusionism to create the two-dimensional pictorial effects. And soon, gradually, what was essentialized and what was seen as recognizable forms, particularly in terms of architecture and of Varanasi Ghats, also became very abstract in nature. And then it was color, forms, and textures that Ram Kumar interwove very craftily in his works to create some of the most remarkable abstract works within the post-independence milieu. There were other artists also, as Avinash Chandra, Damayanti Chawla, another woman artist who seems to have made a contribution not only towards art as such in a modernist manner, but she was also abstractionist. So all of these artists of the Delhi Shilpi Chakra seems to have made a notable contribution, not only a notable contribution, but also enhanced India's modernity post-independence. whereby they very elegantly and in a very subtle and sophisticated manner combined the Western modernist traditions, their visual language, techniques, etc., with India's pictorial tradition. And the amalgamation which they were able to create, they wove a fabric of India's modernity and thereby also made a notable contribution, remaining even to this day, having made a contribution that was